Good morning and good afternoon, everyone. My name is John Shahid. I'll be the moderator for your call. Welcome to the fourth in a series of conference calls in advance of the 2014 elections. If you don't mind, we are going to pause this just for one moment, please. My name is John, and I'll be your moderator for this conference call. If you are logged in through WebEx, you will have seen the instructions in your invite to submit questions. With such a large audience, we hope you understand that we cannot let everyone ask questions, which is why all of our attendees are muted. For those who have only joined through our audio portion, you may still submit questions via the election 2014 email address or through our question bit.ly. The email address is election2014@usimpac.com. And the bit.ly is http://bit.ly/1ID1LP4. We'll be monitoring both of these portals during the call. Now to introduce this special expert series conference call, I'd like to introduce the chairman of USINPAC, Mr. Sanjay Puri. Sanjay?
Thank you, John. It's a pleasure again to do our weekly call. This is our fourth election call, and given the tremendous interest that we see in the elections, this is an unprecedented election. It's also being borne out by the increase in turnout. We're seeing increase in turnout of up to 20% in some parts of the country. So it's not just here, but it's in India. It's all around the world. And what we've done is to make sure that people in the United States around the world get really on-the-ground information from experts. We've done these election calls from polling experts, think tank experts, and this also is an opportunity for you to engage in Q&A with them. So without much further ado, I'll turn it over to our India operations head, Ravinder Sartek, who will be moderating and handling this call. Ravinder?
Thank you so much, Sanjay, and once again, welcome to everyone on this call. As mentioned, we'll have two experts on this call, Mr. Rossow and Mr. Shahid Siddiqui, and each expert will be speaking for about 7 to 10 minutes or thereabouts, and thereafter we'll open up a Q&A. We have a lot of questions coming in on different dimensions. So without, again, taking up much time, I would like to introduce first Mr. Richard Rossow. He's the Wadhwani Chair in U.S.-India Policy Studies at the Center for Strategic and Policy Studies. His focus is on U.S.-India economic relations, and I think that is perhaps the most pertinent area right now or in a few months down the line when we have the next government in India. So may I invite Mr. Rossow to begin with his opening remarks, please.
Well, thank you so much. It's a really pleasure to be here, and thanks to Sanjay and USINPAC for having me. Clearly, it's a topic that most of us have been discussing and debating around the dinner table, and for me, luckily, I get to do it even at my work table for the last several months. So, knowing that you've been through this several times already, I don't think you need a lot of details, but the elections have already begun. They conclude, as everybody remembers, on May 12th, and just 4 days after that, on May 16th, the results will be released, and we'll know how the parties fared in the election. Now, taking a look back, I think you know that tangible data everybody has an idea of. But taking a look back at the last couple of elections, you know, the next question is how long does it take until a government is actually in place and begins to operate? So, you know, every election in India, things turn out a little bit differently. But just taking a look at past precedents, it typically takes 7.5 days after the election results are announced until the new prime minister is inducted by the president of India. So about 7 days after the election results, we should know who the next prime minister is, going by past precedents. About 11 days after that, Parliament will typically be convened for a short parliamentary session. And that short session really is dedicated towards conducting basic parliamentary business like choosing the Speaker of the House and things like that. But legislation won't be taken up at that point, again, going by past precedents. About 30 days after that, a full session of Parliament will be convened. Now, as all of you probably know, India's fiscal year concludes on March 31st. But because elections take place in the spring, The budget that the government passes just before the elections is only dedicated towards funding the government through the elections. The next government after the election is expected to come with a full budget. They'll have different priorities about where they want to spend, different tax priorities. So about 30 days after the short parliamentary session, the Parliament will convene for a full budget session, and shortly into that, the finance minister, whoever that is in the next government, will offer his or her budget speech. And for those of us, you know, as was referenced in the preview, that care about economic issues in the relationship, you know, that budget speech, which will take place in that first budget session, probably sometime in July, will probably be the most precise indicator about where this government is headed in terms of economic policy making, and for those of us in the United States, opportunities for deeper economic engagement between the U.S. and India. Another thing that gets a lot of conversation around the dinner table and also at the U.S. State Department and other places is hoping for a 100-day agenda. I'm hearing this from practically all sources right now. They're hoping that the next Prime Minister will come out with a 100-day agenda of economic reforms that will quickly stimulate an economic turnaround. Judging by the timing that I just offered on how long it takes for the government to get itself formed and to do the budget and to actually pass the budget, you're looking probably 60 days in already to the next government by the time that it's actually done with the basic initiation of functioning and will be ready to do deeper things and strike out on its own and actually get things done. So the 100-day agenda thing, it's an exciting lure that I think a lot of us in America can relate to, and so we want to apply that to India. But really, that's just not how things can work so easily, because about the first 60 of that 100 days is going to be devoted towards just getting the government's operations in order and getting a full budget passed. So plenty of polling out there showing that, you know, I think as everybody on this call would recognize already, you know, Congress right now has about 200 seats in the Lok Sabha, and the BJP has a little bit over 100. And I think pretty much every poll points to a flip of those two numbers, that the BJP will win somewhere in upwards of 200 seats, and Congress will be at 100 seats or maybe even a little bit below that. I will point out, I always offer a word of caution on those things, because there's two hard data points that people point to when they think that the BJP is about to win. The first thing is the polling data. And as we all know, polling data in India is still quite unreliable. For instance, you know, the 5 state elections that took place in November, December, which people point to as really, you know, a victory for polls because they tended to pick the right parties in each election. But the polling data, particularly the pre-polling data, tended to be off by 25% or more in terms of the margin of victory of seats for BJP. And all 3 polls really missed the rise of the Aam Aadmi Party in Delhi. So while the polls tended to pick the party that did indeed win the largest number of seats in those state elections, they were off by such wide margins that really it's impossible to say that the polls really kind of got it right. They just happened to be on the right side at the end of the day, but they're off by very wide margins. The other tangible data point that people point to when they think that the real mood is behind the BJP right now is the results of those 5 state elections. The BJP won approximately 80% of the seats that were up in those 5 states, and 2 of those states, Madhya Pradesh and Rajasthan, are quite large. There again, you know, I do like to point out that going back to 2003, the BJP, which was the incumbent government at the center, won almost the exact same percent of seats in those same states. And then a few months later, it went on to lose the national election in early 2004. So, you know, the polling is unreliable, and I think the BJP doing well in those particular 5 states, at least looking by past precedents, hasn't been the strongest indicator. But, you know, that being said, I'm not here on the call to tell you that I think that that the polling is off and that this mood is off. All signs seem to be pointing towards the BJP victory. I'd just like to mention that the 2 main data points that people use, you know, they're not infallible. The big piece towards winning the election, of course, isn't exclusively how many seats that a party wins. It also depends on how coalition allies or possible outside supporters for a coalition do in their elections as well. You know, the BJP has a core group of very committed allies, the Shiv Sena, the Shiromani Akali Dal, the Telugu Desam Party. But I think even the high-end numbers for those parties, on top of the BJP winning 200 or 220 seats, the BJP will still need additional support from outside parties. Some of the ones that are mentioned most prominently would include the AIDMK in Tamil Nadu, the Trinamool Congress, and the BJP in Odisha. So depending on how these parties fare, that will really give us an indication as to how who will be able to form the government. But the last thing I'll mention on that in terms of coalition allies, I think if the Congress party has any hope at all of stopping this rolling tide of the BJP, it's that some of the parties that are very strongly anti-BJP, particularly I would say the Communist parties of India, if they have a remarkably strong showing and they decide to support Congress in order to keep BJP out, that probably is the only, I think, reasonable path where Congress can come back for UPA 3. But again, I think even the polling data right now shows that the Communist Party, which is typically strongest in West Bengal, is not expected to have a tremendous showing there. They'll do okay in Kerala and some of the other places, but the Communists have managed to pick up as many as 50 seats in past elections, but I don't think anybody has them going quite that high this time around. So if Congress has a hope, it's a really strong showing from anti-BJP committed parties, particularly the Communists. But that looks like not necessarily a terribly strong scenario right now. Just a couple of things to wrap up my piece here to get it going. Mm-hmm. There's a number of polls that have been done on voter sentiments. The Loeb Foundation and Pew in particular have done ones recently. And, I think by and large, voters tend to rank the economy number one, corruption issues as number two, and personal income growth as the number three issues. Various orders there, but usually the economy tends to rank number one. So economic issues seem to be the story of the day leading into this election. I'll wrap up by looking at some of the critical bilateral issues that we face right now as we're in the election, and that we'll also face just after the election. From the U.S. side, I think when we look at the bilateral relationship, there's a lot of concerns, especially inside the Beltway, about some of the bad economic policy decisions that were made under UPA 2. Very aggressive attempts to collect cross-border tax, denial of patents in a couple of cases, and forcing companies to build locally in order to sell to the Indian government. And this has aggrieved a lot of companies that are making a lot of noise about the relationship right now. So that's one of the first things that we'll face from the American side when the new government comes in, is there's a lot of negativity that's been created over the last month. Also, I don't think the U.S. did a very good job, the U.S. government, in maintaining strong relations with the BJP while they are in opposition. Certainly, that's applicable to Modi with the visa revocation, but also other prominent folks that would be in Modi's circle. I don't think that we've got strong ties with them. So it's going to be a delicate dance to rebuild relationships with what I'm sure will be a new face of the BJP, should they come to power. Also, America wants to see additional economic reforms, and for India to wrap up the unfinished business of passing a nuclear liability law that could provide for the development of U.S. nuclear power in India. The last thing on the U.S. side is, of course, we won't have an ambassador in India. Ambassador Nancy Powell announced her retirement. She'll be stepping down just about the time the new government is getting formed there. So the hope is that we'll get somebody posted to India sooner rather than later. A few bilateral issues on the Indian side, and I'll conclude. The first is, there's a lot of hurt in India over this backlash against the economic decisions. As many of you may know, when the Prime Minister came in September, there were actually billboards out at the airport and full-page ads in newspapers taken out by American business groups saying that India is not a safe place to do business. There's a time and a place, I think, for complaining about the business environment, but, India, which is very much on tradition and protocol, to put billboards up trying to embarrass the Prime Minister during his trip, that caused a lot of hurt and embarrassment. Also, India is very concerned about U.S. immigration reform. They think that the version passed by the Senate will hurt India's IT service companies. India is trying very carefully to think about, should Modi become the next Prime Minister, how exactly they stage his rollout in front of the U.S. administration. They don't want to just have him run to Washington on day one and be ready to do things. They want to be very mindful on how they roll him out in terms of relations with the United States. And the last thing I'll wrap up with is that on this issue of an American ambassador, India is very much desirous of having what they would call a rock star ambassador. Nancy Powell, of course, was one of our most experienced India hands in the entire United States, but she didn't have direct access to the White House, and that's something that India feels they had when Ambassador Blackwell was in the Roosevelt House, and they'd like to see that again. So I'll conclude with that, and I'm happy to take questions once my colleague is done with his rounds as well.
Thank you so much, Mr. Rossow. I think you've taken us and our guests through a very interesting integrated overview of beginning with, the process over the next 30 to 60 days in India in terms of the budget, which will be coming up by June, then the 100-day agenda, and the hope for economic reforms. And of course, the last and the most important point also, I think, is the polling data as to how reliable the data is. And also considering that Indian elections are spread over a period of 5 weeks, the poll projections could change. Now, we have a question coming in for you. This question is asking that, on some of the trade issues, because you've covered, I think, the gamut of bilateral relations already, but on some of the trade issues, it may be that the U.S. could take some punitive steps in the next, 1, 2, or 3 months, and which is an entirely internal U.S. process. Now, such kind of a process would perhaps be seen for a new, nascent, just born government in a different light. What do you think is the possibility that some punitive sanction or, priority foreign country kind of things which could perhaps impact initial relations itself? What is the possibility of some such step by the U.S. administration or the U.S. Congress?
Well, there's a couple of things that have happened already. Of course, the FAA has downgraded India's airports authority to a Category 2 status, and also the U.S. Food and Drug Administration has barred imports from some Indian generics manufacturers on April 30th or thereabouts. It's not a firm set date, but around April 30th, the Office of the U.S. Trade Representative releases its annual Special 301 report on intellectual property strength overseas. And yes, there has been a concerted effort, particularly by American pharmaceutical companies, to have India designated the lowest tier country, a priority foreign country. Last year, only one country in the world, Ukraine, was a priority foreign country. And for a number of years before that, no country got that designation. Now, being designated doesn't initiate automatic sanctions immediately, but it opens the door for that to be done. Also, over the summer, I think in July and August, there's a couple of anti-dumping duty investigations that the United States has pending against India, and the final results of those will be announced over the summer. And preliminary reviews of those two already indicated that they expect that on a couple of pipe products and metal products that there will be dumping duties placed against Indian companies. Lastly, at the end of November, the U.S. International Trade Commission, as requested by Congress, is doing will conclude a 1.5-year-long survey of trade barriers in India, and that also may result in punitive trade sanctions. Nothing is said automatically, no matter what the report says, but still that'll open up the door to doing so. So there is a variety of measures. I firmly agree. I think we're not necessarily putting our best foot forward. Some of these things, like the FDA banning imports from some facilities and the FAA downgrade, there's a spreadsheet of things that India has to meet, and India didn't meet those, and so they got downgraded in those two areas. Nothing can be done about that. But some of these other areas of there's flexibility, certainly I do hope that senior leadership shows some maturity and manages to hold back on any kind of punitive sanctions, irrespective of what these reports say. So I do agree we're poised maybe not to put our best foot forward in the relationship with the new government in Delhi.
Thank you. And then perhaps one quick question before we move on to our next speaker, Mr. Shahid Siddiqui. One quick question coming in. What do you think, are there or is there any big picture idea that can rejuvenate, re-nourish, so to say, the U.S.-India relationship?
Yeah, there's probably a few things that I might put on that list. I think the biggest idea, a free trade agreement, I don't think anybody would take very seriously right now, just because the United States is currently negotiating FTAs with Trans-Pacific Partnership with Europe, and then we've got a trade and services agreement. So there's not really enough time and energy and manpower right now. But we do have a bilateral investment treaty that negotiations have already started. I think most people view the bilateral investment treaty as merely a political statement of goodwill, but actually the U.S. model investment treaty has got some strong provisions that may open up further areas for American trade and investment with India. So actually this bilateral investment treaty is to me quite exciting. I think also, if the new government decides that power sector development is going to be a major priority, and that includes nuclear power development, and we find a way around this liability law, You know, there's 2 sites in India that have been designated for U.S. Nuclear power developers to go and build at. So as soon as we get the liability issue resolved, and I think the first time that we turn over a little bit of dirt with a shovel to construct an American nuclear power plant in India, I think that's going to really re-energize a lot of the folks that felt let down when the bill passed that didn't make us very comfortable. So I think the investment treaty is great. I think if we can do something to get American nuclear power under development in India, I think that will add a lot of energy. And, you know, we got great news on trade. Trade continues to grow, and defense trade continues to grow. So I think there's some real highlights there, but the investment treaty and nuclear power are probably a couple of the ones that I think would add a lot of energy right now.
Thank you so much, Mr. Rossow. And may I now introduce our next speaker, Mr. Shahid Siddiqui. He's a senior editor, journalist, as well as a public personality, has been a member of parliament. He's one of the most sought-after speakers currently in this hot election season in India. May I invite Mr. Siddiqui for his opening remarks and comments on how he sees the trends in India elections. Mr. Siddiqui, please.
Thank you very much. Good morning, friends in the United States. This election is a very unique election, which is seeing very different trends from what we have seen in the past. And a new kind of India is emerging, already emerging, but I feel that this election will be a watershed. India, more democratic, more open, more free India, free from the past baggage of colonialism will emerge. India, which was depending more on the leadership of pre-independence India, will now shed that baggage. And this election, the personality of the leader is not from the Nehru-Gandhi family. The personality of the leader is not from the any of the past leaders who dominated Indian political scene. It is, strangely speaking, a leader of the opposition who is dominating the elections in 2014. And Mr. Narendra Modi, it's like a referendum on Mr. Narendra Modi. There are people who are with him. There are people who are opposed to him. His worst of opponents cannot ignore him. Everybody is talking as if the election is not just about India, it's about Narendra Modi. And the fact is that Mr. Narendra Modi has emerged as the symbol of change in Indian politics. Now, what that change is? The change is towards more issues of development. The change is more towards issues, past issues which talked of secularism, which really didn't mean much, which only meant certain vote banks, which all meant taking certain groups and people along with you, which never had the interpretation which we have, the European or the Western interpretation of secularism. So a new kind of thinking emerged with Mr. Narendra Modi. Now, secondly, the important change which is taking place now is that in the past, caste was a very, very important factor. In this election, caste barriers are breaking. If we go by the polling which has already taken place, and whatever surveys we have done, and on the ground, whatever I have seen on the ground in UP and Bihar, especially North India, then I see that for the first time, the caste barrier is breaking, and people from all castes and groups are now ready to vote with one party. In the past, the caste parties like the Samajwadi Party or the Bahujan Samaj Party or Lalu Prasad Yadav's RJD or Nitish Kumar's Janata Dal, secular, these parties used to get certain castes, especially the Hindu castes, used to vote for them. Now, what we have today is that even Dalits who wholeheartedly, vehemently, with a vengeance voted for Bahujan Samaj Party are today now drifting away from BSP. And in the first two phases I have seen is that nearly 20 to 30% of the Dalit vote has moved towards BJP. Now, is this vote for Hindutva? Is this vote for just Narendra Modi or is this vote for change? That's a very important question because that is what is going to decide the future of Indian politics. And I feel that the vote is not for Hindutva, the vote is not for just Narendra Modi, the vote is for change. People want to get away with the feudal style of governance. People want to get out from the caste-based politics. People want to talk about development, sadak, bijli, pani, not about Yadavs and Gujars and Jats and Dalits and Muslims. So that change was already there. Quantitative change was taking place. But in this election, I feel a big qualitative change will come, which will usher India into a truly democratic society. Because up till now, we had democracy, we had voting, but the voting was en bloc for one caste, one religion, one group, here and there. It was a manipulation of caste, manipulation of groups, manipulation of religions, manipulation of languages. But all those barriers are breaking and people are looking at issues, people are looking at leaders, people are looking at their future, people are looking at ideologies and the various day-to-day problems and issues, and that's where they are deciding where their vote will go. Another change in this election is that Congress party, which had dominated Indian politics since independence until 70s, 80s, it was the dominant party in India. Gradually, it lost its support base, but was able to come back in 2004 and in 2009. It got a much larger support. This time, it seems that Congress party is losing its support base quite substantially, quite fast. Another change is that in the past, one family dominated the national scene, national politics. And that family seems to be diminishing. It seems that Nehru-Gandhi family is not able to get the votes it used to get in the past. Sorry. Hello?
Hello, yeah. Thank you
so
much, Mr. Siddiqui.
Yeah.
I think
yes.
There is a question coming in for you, Mr. Siddiqui, please.
Okay, I'll take the vote.
You've recently written a very insightful article, and I think this question is stemming from that, and a couple of our guests are also mentioning about it. The question is that supposing there is a Modi government in India. Hello, can you hear me, sir?
Right.
Yeah.
Yes,
supposing there is a Modi government in India, what could be the one or two steps this new government could take within the first 100 days to provide a healing touch or a forward-looking touch to all of India, which includes the minorities, majorities, or the entire constituents and citizens of India? What could be one or two, effective steps which the next Prime Minister, say Mr. Modi, could take towards that?
Basically, he has to focus on the economy. Economy is in bad shape, and it is harming everyone, whatever religion or group or community you may come from. So he has to take action on the economic front, of course. But if you are focusing on, giving confidence to the minorities, then I think one action he should take is that all those who have been arrested, minority, he should form a commission to look into the arrests of all those who were arrested, whether from the minority or from majority, in the past 5 years, in cases of terrorism and other such developments. There should be a judicial commission which should go into it and find out that if there are any innocent people who have been rounded up, then they should be released. And I think that will give a lot of confidence to not only to the minorities, but everybody who wants justice system to function more effectively, because we have found that justice system is in shambles in India, and which leads to those who are weak, especially the minorities, the Dalits, the poor, they suffer most because of this justice system. Those who are rich, those who have the resources, they are able to utilize the system, but those who do not have, they suffer under the system.
No, that's an excellent point, sir. So within the first 100 days, maybe that could be one effective step. Another question which is coming in, which is maybe more pertinent for the here and now, right now. This question is from, I think, a caller in Texas. She is asking that, given the kind of a rhetoric and the heat of debate in India, which is sliding often into personal allegations also, do you think it is time for Indian leaders to put together a moral code of conduct as opposed to a model code of conduct, which is a legal practice? But can the leaders in India get together for a moral code or a code of honor in terms of, how the campaign would be conducted? If there's a follow-up question, the first question is that, what do you think about such a... Yes, please.
Sorry?
Yeah, so do you think that there is scope and a possibility? Hanji, please.
There's a lot of scope, because in the past people used to get away with whatever they wanted to say, because the electronic media was not that alert, the social media was not there, the telephone, which now works as a recording device all the time, and it's uploaded on the YouTube and elsewhere, was not that effective in India. Now with that happening, everybody is caught. And they cannot get away what they are saying, even in remote places and villages, and therefore they will have to be much more cautious. Already it is having an effect on lot of leaders. So they used to, the talk they used to have in the past is now coming out. It seems that people are more irresponsible in this election. That is not the case. The fact is that those irresponsible statements are now being blown up. They are coming out. In the past, they were not. In the past, my experience of campaigning in the rural areas is that elections were much more, full of language which one cannot, repeat. Very irresponsible allegations were made in those elections, but now they have to be much more cautious. But the Election Commission will have to take some stand on it. There should be a policy on it, and strict action should be taken against those who use religious, linguistic, caste differences and try to whip up emotions on these issues, make false personal allegations on leaders. There should be some mechanism by which immediate action can be taken, because if you allow the courts to take an action, that courts takes 5-6 years. By that time you reach the next election and nobody really is punished.
Thank you so much. A follow-up question to this. Actually, I think this guest listener of ours is really wanting to zero down to this aspect. He is asking that in case there's such a code of honor which can be contemplated, who do you think specifically could be some 3 or 4 leaders in India, which of course I think would also include you as a prominent voice, who could come together and maybe talk to the Election Commission or between themselves, like a interdisciplinary or interpolitical party group, who could articulate this thing right now and here? Do you think there's scope?
In India, we have no doubt of leaders who are extremely responsible, who are capable of having that moral authority to, and it should not be just political leaders. I feel people from the public sphere, former judges, some very senior media persons, some very senior professors and teachers. We can form a group of people before whom these allegations and complaints can be taken, and they can give an immediate, verdict on that, and some action can be taken against some of the leaders. Some of the leaders who make this kind of speeches can be barred from contesting elections for a few years. The courts have done it in the past with Mr. Bal Thackeray. That was done, but it takes 5, 6, 7 years to come to a verdict in a court in India. So there has to be a very fast mechanism, and a mechanism on which everybody can have faith, which is neutral, which is objective, which is not political, which rises above political vendetta and gives a verdict which is acceptable to all.
Thank you. I think all of us would wish you the best of luck and such a leadership group if it comes forward and takes the initiative on this kind of a matter, sir. Now, one last question from me as the moderator before I hand over the mic, so to say, to our chairman, Mr. Sanjay Puri. The last question is that how are you seeing potentially, and this is real, numbers and real politics we are talking now, the numbers coming up in UP? What is your estimate perhaps for the BJP, the Congress, and the Aam Aadmi Party, if any, or some seats? Broadly, if you can read the tea leaves, sir, for us.
Yes. I am very free with my ideas, and I don't feel constrained in coming out with numbers. Because, and for quite some time I have been saying that their numbers are going to surprise even those who are extremely pro-BJP, because in UP, where you have 80 seats, there is a huge change. People are fed up with, and the vote is not just for Modi, vote is against the present Samajwadi Party government and its leaders, Mr. Mulayam Singh Yadav and Mr. Akhilesh Yadav. And the fact is that a lot of people have come together in spite of the fear psychosis which was created in North India especially. And a big riot took place in Muzaffarnagar, which had its impact on Uttar Pradesh. But in spite of all that, what I feel is that BJP is going to get somewhere between 45 to 55 seats, which will be nearly two-thirds of all the seats in UP. And Samajwadi Party and both BSP are going to suffer. Congress is going to lose most of its seats. They are going to end up somewhere between 6 to 10 seats, and the rest of the 20 seats will be divided between Samajwadi Party and BSP. So it is going to be UP is going to go all the way for BJP, and it's the same with Bihar. UP, Bihar, the North Indian belt is going BJP way, and there seems to be a huge wave for Mr. Narendra Modi.
Thank you, sir. That was, I think, a very insightful discussion. And now may I invite Sanjay in DC to please wrap up. And I believe our first speaker, Mr. Rossow, is of course also with us. And still we have some more questions coming in. So perhaps, Sanjay, you can look at the wrap up and a few questions and your own thoughts, please, sir. Thank you.
Great. Thanks, Ravinder. Good to talk to both Rick and Mr. Siddiqui for their fantastic insights. Rick, people are going to start wondering whether you live in the U.S. or you live in India, because you were talking like Arnav Goswami or somebody like that sitting in India. Tremendous insight. So it's amazing. I'll take a first question to Mr. Siddiqui, which in the U.S., I don't know if you're aware, Mr. Siddiqui, or articles are getting circulated extensively on social media. There's a lot of talk going on about, you did a piece recently about the Jazia attacks and others. How is the reaction? Because you must be facing a lot of pushback from all kinds of folks, because some of those comments that you're making in the articles are very insightful, but obviously they are going against conventional wisdom, Mr. Siddiqui.
That always happens, but one should be prepared and ready to take all the criticism. When you say something different, something new, then that always happens, that counts. But in fact, I'm very happy that the criticism is not coming from the common masses. I'm moving around in the villages, and a lot of people who read my articles are coming back to me, appreciating what I'm saying, because in my article in Times of India, I said that in the modern times, Muslims have to pay the jizya, the secular jizya, in the terms of their votes for protection. Congress and Samajwadi Party and others have been saying that we will protect you, we will keep India secular if you vote for us. We will not let India become a Hindu Rashtra if you vote for us. So we have to pay the price of keeping India secular in terms of our votes. But it is only on the social media that I find the criticism. It's the semi-educated who criticize people like me and condemn me or those people who are directly associated with the Congress party and other parties. In fact, I was expecting much harsher criticism, but that criticism has not come my way, and I'm feeling quite satisfied and happy that a lot of people are appreciating, and especially Muslims are appreciating what I'm saying and what I'm writing.
Well, you're very popular here in the U.S., Mr. Siddiqui. I can tell you your articles are getting circulated. But no, I'll forward you some of the things that are going on because it's getting circulated and circulated and again. One last question I'll ask you is, is the Shahi Imam Bukhari has announced support to the Congress party. What impact do you think it has on the bloc Muslim vote, if there is anything like that?
Number one, there is no bloc Muslim vote. Muslim vote is getting divided. It has always been divided, and this time it is much more divided in Delhi or Uttar Pradesh. In Delhi, it's getting divided between Congress and the Aam Aadmi Party. And in fact, the Imam Bukhari's appeal had a reverse impact. More Muslims have voted for Aam Aadmi Party than for Congress Party. Imam Bukhari doesn't have much of credibility among the Muslims. And this is a wrong concept and notion that Muslims or Hindus in our country or even Sikhs vote on the basis of the call from a religious leader. In fact, Indians have proved to be extremely wise in their voting patterns, and they have never been influenced by religious leaders, whether those of Hindus or Muslims or Christians or Sikhs. So Imam Bukhari had no impact whatsoever in UP and Delhi, and I think in fact he had a negative impact. He is uniting more people behind the BJP than uniting any Muslims behind Congress.
Well, thanks, Mr. Siddiqui, for your comments. Rick, I have one last comment for you. Thank you. Rick, are you recommending, given your tremendous background both in U.S. and obviously I think to our listeners around the world, you've shown the tremendous depth of India awareness that you have. Do you have one or two, as you said, rock star candidates in your mind for the U.S. ambassador role? Because this is a very important thing. I think this administration needs to get this right. Because of the new government, therefore also where they're hitting the reset button, as it's become a cliche to say. Do you have one or two suggestions for our listeners?
Well, I think there's two names that are kind of making the rounds so far: Raj Shah at USAID and Ash Carter, who's the former Deputy Secretary of Defense. Those are the two that I hear most prominently. I think Ash Carter and the work that he did on trying to really strengthen U.S.-India defense relations. Defense, frankly, is treated at a bit different level than other economic issues, because defense trade and also defense cooperation, it's not just a trade aspect, but also a broader partnership and security interests. So the work that Ash had done, I think, was considered among the most groundbreaking in the Obama administration so far. So I think among the people's names that I hear so far, I think he's got that kind of edge of involved in strategic, a very senior level in the U.S. government. I think he's probably the one I hear most prominently that would qualify as sort of the rock star status.
Rick, would he meet one of the criteria that you have laid out, or you said the Indians have laid out, as picking up the phone and getting access to the White House, which Nancy Powell could not?
Yeah. Well, that's going to be a tough order to fill, because I think President Obama came in with such a strong domestic focused agenda that you just didn't have this group of real foreign policy folks that were sitting around him quite the same way that you had with President Bush, for instance, where there was a group of senior foreign policy leaders that were really looking to reorganize America's international strategic position. So Obama came in faced with the major domestic crisis, with healthcare reform, with financial regulatory reform, and so I think just the folks that he would have surrounded himself with, that would be that phone call away from the White House. Most of those people would be a bit more domestically focused. So posting in Delhi, for some of the real insiders, just not as appealing as it was for some of President Bush's senior folks.
Wonderful. Rick, that was excellent and honest feedback, and we really appreciate you taking the time, and I'm sure our viewers, I see at least 30 other questions coming your way, which we obviously don't have enough time for, but thanks for taking the time, and thanks for taking the time, Shahid. This has been a great, insightful conference, and thanks to all our audience, to all our volunteers, Rabinder, John Zaidis, Surbi Garg, Priya Banerjee, Sue Ghosh, and all of the other volunteers who worked very, very hard, Rick Chauhan, to make this thing happen. I'll turn it back to John.
Thank you, Sanjay. Thank you, everyone, for joining our 2014 Indian Election Series conference call. This now concludes our call. We hope you join us next weekend at 11 a.m. Eastern for another call. You will receive dial-in instructions automatically if you have already signed up previously. We look forward to seeing and hearing from you on our Facebook page, at our events, and through the many means of contacting USINPAC at usimpac.com. Thanks again.
Thank you very much.